It is day 185 of the second Trump administration, and outrage over the Epstein files is not dying down. Today, the Wall Street Journal reported that the Justice Department told President Trump in May that his name appeared in the Epstein files, along with many others. Now, as the Wall Street Journal points out, being mentioned in the records is not a sign of wrongdoing. In response, the Department of Justice said that the president was made aware of the findings in their review of the Epstein case during a routine briefing, and that nothing warranted further investigation or prosecution. While a White House spokesperson said in part, quote, "This is nothing more than a continuation of the fake news stories concocted by the Democrats and the liberal media, just like the Obama Russiagate scandal," end quote. All right, Trump has been trying to draw attention away from Epstein by going after President Obama. Today, Director of National Security Tulsi Gabbard joined the White House press briefing to repeat a conspiracy theory promoted by the president that President Obama ordered an investigation into Russia and the 2016 election in order to hurt Trump. And in Florida, a judge has denied the Attorney General's request to unseal Epstein grand jury transcripts from the investigation there, writing that the court's hands are tied. All right, with that, let's bring in our nightcap MSNBC senior political analyst Matthew Dowd. He's also a former George W. Bush strategist and founder of Country Over Party. Molly Jong-Fast, special correspondent for Vanity Fair and an MSNBC contributor, and Evan McMorris Santoro, reporter for Notice. Welcome to all of you, friends. Thank you for being with us. Molly, this Stephen Chung, the White House press guy who put out the statement that this is another invention of the liberal media and the Democrats. Interesting theory, except this story, this continued story about the Epstein files and lists wouldn't exist but for, mostly speaking, Republicans, but extreme conspiracy theorists.
Well, there are so many parts of this statement that are untrue, or let me rephrase, not accurate. But the one that I think of is that the Wall Street Journal, which published this is the sort of second Epstein story, is owned by a 94-year-old Republican named Rupert Murdoch, who is as responsible for creating Trump as anyone. So I would say that the liberal media is not in play here. Yeah,
and Evan, the interesting thing is there were a lot of people who didn't know or think that there was that much more there. But the events of the last couple of weeks have made all sorts of people across the political spectrum awfully curious about what's not being released and why.
You know, it wasn't long ago that we were talking about this Trump administration, this Trump time being about this incredibly well-oiled machine of like just everything functions so cleanly. And over the past couple of weeks, I'll tell you, my colleague Jasmine Wright and I at Notice Newsletter, we've been reporting on this. And the White House, at first, they thought, we can stop this. We can just come out there and put an end to it. Then they said, actually, okay, we can contain this. We can contain this. We know how to contain this. Now they sort of resignedly say, okay, well, I think we can weather this. But we have to weather it, right? Like, this is a thing that, somebody said at my office the other day that we should rename the Streisand effect the Epstein effect, right? Because this is sort of like one of the biggest self-owns I've ever personally covered, right? This administration sort of came in on the winds of this Epstein story. They put in a lot of very senior people from the Epstein conspiracy world into senior positions. And then those people couldn't deliver enough for the conspiracists.
Right.
And now the administration is sort of flopping around trying to figure out how to, get their way out of that.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Matthew, that they've got all sorts of people on the outside that they can't sort of control the messaging. Donald Trump's tried everything. He's called them names. He's decided he wants the Washington Commanders to change their name. Everything. We're making trade deals with countries I didn't know we traded with. But they've still got Dan Bongino as the deputy director of the FBI. And this is confusing because depending on whom you ask, they're like, they want him to stay because he can do less damage inside than if he goes back to being a podcaster and talking about this. But there's lots of right-wing podcasters who are out there talking about this.
Well, there's a ton, including one of the ones with the largest brand. And, Joe Rogan's still talking about this every day in the course of this. To me, this is I have not noticed Donald Trump off his game in probably 10 years I've watched this. And every single thing he reaches in his bag of tricks, he's tried. He reaches in Hillary emails, it hasn't worked. He reaches in President Obama, it hasn't worked. All of his normal tricks in this case haven't worked, primarily because, as was discussed, this is a conspiracy theory pushed by the right wing that he doesn't, he thought he had control of and he thought he could deal with in the course of this. The other part of this that I think is fascinating is is there's a scene in the movie Justice League, at the end of the movie Justice League, when all the, they band together to fight this thing called Steppenwolf. And he has all these things called the parademons that are his sort of minions that are that. At the very end, the parademons start attacking Steppenwolf.
Right.
And Aquaman turns to Batman and says, "Do you smell that?" And then Batman says, "Yeah, it's fear." And I think that's what's going on. I think you can see it in the speaker's mind. You can see it in Donald Trump. You can see it in the staff, because they know that this is a one word. Anything with a one word is always a good scandal.
Right.
And it doesn't go away until it's finally exhausted. And they know full well that Donald Trump has an attachment to this. There is video. There's all sorts of things that they know that, but they don't know all the extent of it. And I think they're in fear. And I think that smartly, the Democrats smell it. And the media smells it, which is great for the media to investigate this story. And Donald Trump doesn't normally operate from a place of fear.
Yeah. I'm going to get back to this. You made a comment about the speaker. We're going to talk about the politics of this in a minute. We were in the green room together, Molly, and we were watching a little bit of Lawrence's Amazing Hour. Mm-hmm. It was hard to sort of focus on the show while I was watching what he was doing. And he has made possibly the most important point in all of this. There are real victims of this case. And they've been long ignored. Yeah. And for all the people who are trying to figure out what's in these files, we're still not hearing a whole lot about the devastation that was imposed upon these victims, these girls.
Yeah, I think Lawrence had a really good point. I mean, I think he used the word children. Right? Yeah. They're between the ages of 14 and 18. And the testimony that he read was pretty brutal about these girls aging out of Epstein visits.
At 18.
At 18.
Yeah.
No, agreed. And look, we're living in like backlash to backlash to backlash. So we have been, in Me Too, and then this weird post-Me Too nightmare. And now we're back to some kind of accountability, maybe, but still no one is talking about the victims. And look, the thing about Epstein is also this case, people keep finding. I mean, CNN's Andrew Kaczynski today found that Epstein was at Trump's second wedding. That's very, all of this is just very inconvenient. And these two men were friends for a long time, is the reporting. And so there's just going to be more and more photos. And it just seems like it's unclear to me how you can end a news cycle with so much possible material.
That's why I think what Lawrence did was so important, because I think too often, whatever the story is, we don't cover the victims enough of it.
Correct.
And that could be on tariffs.
Sure.
That we talk about tariffs, and is Donald Trump going to negotiate this, and we forget about 22 businesses went out of business because of this, or whatever the thing happens to be, or the healthcare crisis. Yeah. Donald Trump was able to push this through, and we debate the process, and we don't say, well, what happened?
Yeah, if we're going to dredge the story up again, then let's do it the right way this time. Let's talk about
that's why I think the victims, and Donald Trump, it always does well, because he always wants to ignore the victims of everything he's done in his life. Right. He wants to ignore the victims of his
Well, he called this a non-story.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
Nobody
a non-story,
cares.
not for the hundreds of women or hundreds of children that went through this.
Yeah. Evan, a number of reporters have noted that when this first came out, there was a general feeling in Washington that all the various ways you described that this will blow over, they'll get past it. And now everybody understands they're not going to the extent that Speaker Johnson has decided the House, everybody's going home.
That's right.
So as not to vote on a resolution about this.
That's right. I mean, the Democrats have sort of grabbed onto this, and it's not just Democrats. There's a bunch of Republicans who are joining in with them, and it became
enough to force a vote, enough to have done this so that Johnson had to tell everybody to go home.
That's right. I mean, to make the their Congress leave early. Yeah. It's a remarkable scene, right? I mean, this is a thing that actually this literally ground the government to a halt. That's literally how serious this is. But to what you're saying before, the substance of this really does touch kind of everybody. No party comes off clean in this story. You want to get in the substance of it. The politics, though, the way the politics have been played out, they really do just touch Trump at this moment. That's the problem that they have, is that originally the idea was this was a political way to get the Democrats. Right? We're going to get the Democrats. We're going to get these names out from this list, and we're going to take these Democrats down. And the problem has been that once they got in, it came around and sort of blew back right on them. So there is this conversation about the substance that's very important. It's a very serious story, but that issue is a structural issue about a lot of problems in our society that people like Epstein could saunter around in powerful places with nobody really stopping them for a long time. But this is a political story now. And the politics are really Trump's problem, I think.
Molly, how do you see this unfolding? Because something's got to give. I think Mike Johnson, who I think is pretty savvy sometimes, I think he's miscalculated this. The idea that these Republican members of Congress are going to go spend 5 weeks with their constituents who are mad at them about all sorts of things, and then this is not going to affect them, I think is just bad math.
Well, and there's just more, there's still so much more content out there, right? This has been just 2 weeks of people digging. Imagine what they're going to find in another 5 weeks. I think, look, I think Mike Johnson is really over his skis here. He was kind of installed at the privilege of Donald Trump, right? He got his job because Trump liked him. And he's not a whip counter. You know, the times when he's had a lot of failures whipping the vote. The times when he's been able to get the numbers he's needed has been when Donald Trump has literally called people and been like, you need to vote this way. Or when Elon, that first time for the CR, when Elon and Trump both called people. I think the reason he sent people home was because he didn't know how his members were going to vote. And I think that's an important thing. And again, remember, it's important to remember that this is like, we have sat here for a decade and been like, this is not okay. This is not okay. And Trump's base had been like, no, we love it. And all of a sudden, here's a scandal where Trump's base is like, this is not okay.
Right.
And I think that's really the most important thing about this.
Now, how does this? How do you fix that problem? Because the base is the base. They're there. Clearly, they're not buying whatever Donald Trump's selling at the moment. How serious a problem do you think this ends up being for Donald Trump and Republicans?
Well, you know, I think about the country and when it votes is in thirds. So I think there's a third of the country that may not like part of this story, but is going to follow if it's going to fall in line.
Right.
And then the third of the country, which is the sort of Democrats, which is no matter what it is, if even Donald Trump did something really positive, they're not going to see it that way, whatever. And then there's the third, which bleeds into some of the MAGA folks. And also then the other part of that third bleeds into some of the Democrats at different times. That's the third they have to worry about. Right. Because when you head into a midterm and you only have a third, and I think what it's going to do mostly is demotivate the Republicans. They're going to be like, he didn't do anything about inflation. He's messed up this Epstein thing, which we thought it was going to all blow on the Clintons, which is what their ultimate goal was. They were going to catch Bill Clinton. And throw, that's who was going to be thrown away in the course of this. Now the person that looks like it's going to affect, as Evan said, is Donald Trump. That's what I would be worried about if I were the Republicans, the demotivation of the base in a midterm election in the course of this. The other part that they completely miscalculated, I think, is they think protecting Donald Trump will help them in the midterms. That didn't go well in 2018. The last time they did this, they got their butts handed to them in the midterms in 2018 at governor's races, Senate races, and House races because they sought to protect Donald Trump. I don't understand if they're their own self-preservation, why they think protecting Donald Trump when they can watch the same videos we do. And they know Donald Trump's history. I mean, the Donald Trump's history is like, this is not like some shock that he would end up on Epstein Island or on Epstein's plane because of his history in this. That's the part I don't think. They think that protect him will protect them, and it never has.
But they're scared of him. I mean, they're scared of the tweets. That's why they've been protecting him this whole time. I don't think that there's even a political calculus here as much as just fear. The thing, when you were talking about this before, Tony Fabrizio, Trump's pollster, had that sort of about 10% of his base is like real conspiracy-minded. There's a sort of more attractive word for it that he uses, but that is about 10% of his base.